Welcome to the Commonwealth of Learning's podcast series, Sustainability and Growth, Women Leaders Driving Long-Term Success in NGOs. I am Dr. Ann Wallace and I am your host. The development of civil society and peace in the world are but some of the commitments of the Commonwealth of Learning. In this quest, CALL supports institutions around the globe by helping them to solve local problems with local solutions. In this podcast series, we seek to illustrate to women and girls the importance of service to community by highlighting the sterling work that has been done and is being done by female NGO leaders around the world. Our guest today is Ms. Omashani Naidoo, an educator and CEO who is deeply passionate about education in Africa, envisioning it as a model for first world countries in a people-centric environment and development as its focus. She advocates for the integration of cultural heritage into education, the promotion of core values, and the innovative use of ICTs as a constitutional right to create contextually relevant lifelong learning opportunities. Undergirding her passion, Ms. Naidoo is a qualified mathematics and computer studies teacher holding an honors degree in education, training and development, a master's degree in ICT education, and she's currently pursuing a PhD in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. She has made significant contributions as a subject matter expert at Mindset Network, where she developed grade 10 and grade 11 information technology materials for print, video, and computer-based media. I beg your pardon, computer-based multimedia. Additionally, she presented mathematics lessons on the Mindset Learn channel. Ms. Naidoo began her career at SchoolNet South Africa in 2007, eventually rising to the position of operations manager. In this role, she coordinated ICT training projects, managed relationships with education officials, and oversaw project management and training. She is a master trainer for Microsoft Google Education and Intel, and has been recognized as a global Intel visionary and Microsoft innovative expert. Currently, she serves as the executive director of SchoolNet South Africa. This lady has an outstanding educational background, and she's doing great work in the field of education. It is my pleasure to say welcome, Ms. Omashani Naidoo.
Yeah, and thank you so much. It sounds so fabulous when you mention all of the various sort of undertakings. But yes, I'm just a normal human being doing God's work on earth. Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. It's my pleasure to meet you, normal human being. I will start by saying to you, Omashani, you're a highly skilled mathematics and computer studies expert. You are recognized as a global Intel visionary and a Microsoft innovative expert. Now, these are qualifications that are well sought after in the corporate world, but you're not in the corporate world. Why have you chosen, one, to be a teacher, and two, to serve an NGO?
The basic element is about passion, being passionate about development, and it's about personal fulfillment. And I think, support and development is such an important aspect of teaching. And this brings with it, a number of elements around being able to do good on earth, and so much so that it doesn't feel like you're doing a job. And I think this is, the joy that one feels when you have teachers in a room or any of the beneficiaries that you're training, and to be able to understand their light bulb moment and know that you're part of their learning journey is just such a special feeling. And I think being involved on the ground keeps us connected both in the academic space, but also being able to live that principle of being a lifelong learning. And I think that for me is just such a special element for me to be able to learn and grow as well.
Excellent.
Being in service as an NGO, that's a different sort of element because, I mean, that's now giving back to the community. And I think being in an NGO allows you to make a positive difference quite quickly because we're able to respond, innately to the problems that we see on the ground and be able to immediately be able to put in steps to alleviate some of those stresses. But I take joy in knowing that we are working toward a digital skills for all approach and living the sustainable development goals.
That's great. That is wonderful news to hear. I'm glad to hear it. It's your passion. I'm glad to hear that you're working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Tell the audience, please, a little bit about SchoolNet SA in South Africa and what you do there.
Okay, SchoolNet is a public benefit organization, and we're a not-for-profit company. It was established in 1997, and for us, our work is centered around ICT skills, education. And it's very different to learning about IT skills. And there's a fallacy, I think, in terms of understanding that it's all about learning about applications and just being in an e-learning environment. It's so much more because the work that we do is about making people comfortable or allowing them to be comfortable with digital technologies for learning and allowing them that space to grow in that in whichever field that they're working with. So we work mostly with underserved communities, so in public sector schools. And for us, it's about the educators, the learners, the whole school development, but we also work in communities that are in need, as well as for out of school youth and unemployed.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rel. That gives us a little insight into what you do. And you have been in this, as you said, since 1997. But I know that with the advent of COVID-19, online learning became more popular. E-learning technologies is now ubiquitous in the global learning landscape. And so I have two questions as it relates to SchoolNet South Africa. And these questions are based on the fact that I am aware that while online learning is popular, not everywhere has teachers who have been adequately trained to be online learners. So my question to you is, do you have easy access to adequately trained staff, who are conversant with using the technology for training purposes? And the other part of that question is, are your students, you did mention the underserved communities, are your students adequately financed to be able to afford the technological devices to give them access to learning through technology?
Difficult questions. And so on the question around adequately trained staff, and I think this is what I was alluding to in the previous question. When we talk about adequately trained staff, on the one hand, yes, digitally literate staff is required because we work with technology devices and we can't be sort of seemingly training on things that we don't know about. So we've got to know about the device. But we've also got to have the understanding of how to teach. And this is where the education dynamic comes into place. And for us, it's about merging the two and understanding that when we deal with teachers and in the education space, we have to have a methodology that is about teach training and teaching, and using that as a way, as a foundation for how we teach IT and ICT skills.
Mm,
And the important aspect is being able to use these digital technologies for teaching and learning. And
okay.
that is key for us.
Great.
On the aspect of financing, though, it's such a difficult question because, financing, we know it's never going to be enough, especially in developing countries. So, in the short answer is no, students are not adequately financed. But
Mhm.
when you start looking at government programs, and for South Africa particularly, we've got something called the Universal Service and Access Agency. What that does is it supports and guides telecommunications companies in South Africa who are licensed to operate in this country to be able to support schools with technology devices. So we've got that added sort of assistance in terms of that to ensure that schools at least have some kinds of technological advancements. But we've also got provincial education departments doing a lot of work in terms of trying to get access into the schools, but it's not enough. And
Mm-hmm.
that sort of looks at, if you look at areas, I mean, South Africa is so diverse, like many other countries,
Mm-hmm.
where you've got many that have, but so many that do not have.
Mm-hmm.
And in areas where, for example, there isn't stable connectivity, you can't have access. Even
Right.
if you wanted to have a digital device and you're paying for data, that data is not even usable because in some
Mm-hmm.
areas and points of presence and you don't have stable connections. So it's about providing equitable access, and
Mm-hmm.
financing is often a huge issue because we know, for example, with AI in education, everybody's talking about AI. And when I say everybody, it's the
Mm-hmm.
haves that are talking about
Yes.
AI education.
Mm-hmm.
But when
Mm-hmm.
we have a conversation with our teachers and you say, but when you look back, do our teachers even have access to devices, leave alone AI technologies and tools?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about access to digital technologies, we're then talking about access to the technology, access to the data that allows them all of these things. And financing is a huge element around why we do not have it.
Right. Well, that's a interesting response you've given there, because I was indeed wondering, how are you financed? I wonder about the because I'm fully aware that, contrary to popular belief, online learning is not cheap. There's a feeling that you can go online and it is cheaper. It is not. I've been involved in it and I know that it is. So, with all of these challenges, how is your institution financed? How does it stay afloat, aside
With
from the
great
help of the
difficulty.
agencies?
With great difficulty always. And I think, financing an NGO is so challenging, and being responsible for financing an NGO is so challenging. And I think if we were talking about financing NGOs about 15 years ago, I think funders were still open to the fact that you could maybe fund some aspect of operating expenses. But
Hmm.
now, rarely do any funders pay for operating expenses for an NGO. So we're meant to be funding or implementing projects with the funds that we receive, but nobody sort of considers, well, I've still got to keep a roof over our heads. I've still got to maintain staff salaries. I've still got to pay for utilities. All of these things come at a cost when I want to
Yes.
develop my staff. And when
Hmm.
we want to attend conferences to be more innovative in the way that we implement programs, that
Right.
all comes at a cost. So I would like, some more sort of assistance around funders and funding programs to ensure that, operating expenses for NGOs particularly is considered as part of the funding mechanism, because how else are we to survive?
Precisely.
Doing the good work that we do, because we are on the ground and we are implementing and alleviating many of the stresses and challenges that communities face. But without the funding to do so, we don't, our legs are sort of chopped off at the knees because we don't have the full resources to do the good work that we want to do.
So then I wonder, because you're providing a service to communities that is clearly very needed. You're I dare say then that you are providing a service to the government, for the government of the country. But are you seen as a support to the government, or are you seen as just exposing government's weaknesses?
Oh, no. For us at SchoolNet, particularly ours is to complement and support. And I think, and we do that quite brilliantly because we work with departments of education in terms of the various provinces that we have. And it's not to compete with, because
Mhm.
I think there's so much of development work that needs to be done. We can't be, stresses of the environment in itself. So we
Mhm.
provide the services that align to the goals of national government. And I think
Wonderful.
we address the gaps and we provide additional support when it's needed.
Well, that's excellent. Addressing the gaps, I think governments like that. because government cannot be expected to do all. So I think governments are indeed very
Exactly.
happy for institutions like yours with the perspective that you have. Now, you're gifted with a burning passion to provide service through an NGO, and you are gifted with the passion of inculcating culture into education. What I'd like to know is what is the receptivity to culture? You're in a country where there's a very high instance of cultural existence. Do you get any pushback of any kind when it comes to delivering in a cultural exactly, using the technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge
Yeah.
of of your delivery? It, does it interfere with culture in any way?
The important aspect and the way that it's such an important and valid concern. And I think especially when it comes to integrating technology, because in many sort of sectors, in areas where technology hasn't sort of is not prolific, it's a
Mhm.
worry for many people in terms of deleting or diluting some of the cultural perspectives. But for us, South Africa is so rich in cultural heritage. It's so difficult to
Yes.
I don't think we ever want to eradicate it because that's what makes Africa wide so beautiful,
Mhm.
in terms of our cultural beauty. And I
Mhm.
think we at SchoolNet approach this by ensuring that our content and the way we approach our teachers is culturally sensitive and inclusive. And I think we don't go there all knowing and, do what we say. It's about actually engaging with community leaders, with stakeholders as well, to understand their perspectives and to incorporate these sort of inputs into the manner in which we approach schools,
Mhm.
but the community centers as well as our beneficiaries that we work with. And I think
Mhm.
this is really the success that we have because
Mhm.
without that cultural sensitivity, we actually talk down to people, and that's not what we want. It's the learning with and together, and it's not telling anybody, we know better. It's about learning
Mhm.
together and helping people just be better together.
I'm very glad to hear you say that because, one often wonders about when a person comes into this kind of environment driven by their passion, if the passion takes over and they are not cognizant of the need to skillfully manage the environment. Would you say then that a leader or head of an NGO has to have the ability to lead? They must have management skills, financial literacy in order to negotiate the landscape that they're working in.
I think absolutely. And I think, there's so many sort of challenges that one faces as a female leader. And I think, it's about leadership skills, it's expertise, it's overcoming stereotypes that we typically sort of experience in the world. It's about, you know, and as a woman, you're sort of constantly having to prove your expertise and that you have the skills that you think that we say that I have, and it's about balancing professional responsibilities that we have with society expectations. And it's a huge juggling act, I would say, because I think it's quite difficult to support and mentor whilst trying to lead, because oftentimes it's, you got to be harsh in an environment, but you've got to still try to be inclusive. So it's diverse talents, and it's always sort of a balancing act. I think it's a juggling act in terms of that. But I try to address these obstacles head on, and I think you all you can do is just pave your way for others to be better.
Omashani, I'm very glad you touched on that because we know that globally women are challenged in society. Just being women, we become reasoned for challenge. And there are lots of stereotypes associated with women that contribute to those challenges. But you are a female leader with a bit of a difference. You have mathematical skills, you're an IT expert, you're rich in STEM subjects. And I wonder if the challenges you get as a female are any different from those of us who don't have these skills.
I don't know that I am any different in terms of a female leader, in terms of the skills that I have. I do think there are some stress points, as I said, being in a STEM sort of field, it means that, it's quite difficult for women to sort of charter a new path and to break the ceiling in many instances. And I do think that as female leaders, we fight many battles, battles with ourselves, battles with the environment, battles with the organization goals, and trying to just find a, you know, and not an easy fit, but a balanced fit in terms of the way we approach things. So I don't think I'm any different than any other women that are out there, but I do think that we do have it a little bit more stressful in terms of the way that we engage in this environment, let's say.
Mhm. Okay, great. I'm sure that our young women and girls will be happy to hear this because it is always a challenge for us. Now, you mentioned earlier that you deal with the underprivileged communities, and I've looked at some reports where there's a UNICEF report that I saw that uh, the poverty in South Africa is visited very heavily on the girls, on gender, and then the statistical report indicates that it's like a 14 to 1 ratio between men and girls and women in terms of education. So it really means that girls are disadvantaged. In your outreach, which clearly you've indicated you do reach out, do you look very closely at programs and activities that would target such girls?
Absolutely. And I think, it's crucial. I think it's crucial for us to have outreach programs for girls. And there's so many disadvantages, as we were alluding to, for women and girls particularly. And I think for so many households where women are the breadwinners, and so many sort of spaces where women think that they can't be economically active. Particularly, I mean, South Africa has such a huge levels of poverty, gender inequality in terms of work options, but also if you look at gender-based violence, in
Mhm,
terms of what women face generally. And I do think specific programs for women are just so important because I myself, when I'm training with women and girls, when we are together, it's a collegiality. It's about us then sharing, oh, but I do this. And yes, and it becomes more of an opening where it builds
mhm,
a trust relationship. And I think in that space, it becomes a safe space. And that becomes in that moment, in that time, it becomes a better learning space because women are then open to those opportunities. But that being said, I do think that women need to understand that they can achieve academically and economically, and they need to just seize and become more aware of those opportunities. And this is why outreach programs do that. But I do think also that we must not negate the need for also development all genders, because we
mhm.
we have to be all inclusive, because we can't go completely on the other side, because then you also exclude the male child or other genders, and then you are also then having an exclusive environment in terms of learning and development.
Well, what I'm hearing is that not only are you a proponent of education, of cultural inclusion, you are very aware of the need for the inclusion of the genders because that's who we are as people, and you pay attention to the people who are on the, let's just say, the wrong side of the economic divide. So you're very all inclusive in your approach to ensuring that this NGO serves the national needs.
That's right.
What type of leader are you? What type of leader would your colleagues say you are?
I was asking my colleagues earlier on. I was like, what do I say when I have, questions about what kind of person I am? And I think, hmm, I, I try to be collaborative and I try to be empathetic. I try to be visionary because you've got to be innovative to be still sort of functioning as an NGO for a long time and to continue and be sustainable. But I do believe in empowering my team, firstly, as well as our beneficiaries. I like open communication, and I think I encourage innovation in thinking, and this can only be done by reading and being aware of what's out there. But I think in an environment where you encourage everybody to be the best and to be motivated, we've also got to, and I'm a perfectionist, unfortunately. I don't know whether it's a fortunate or unfortunate thing for many of us staff, because, then it's like a demand excellence. And I think so juxtaposing it with patience and being able to listen and provide guidance, it's as I said, it's a juggling act and a balancing one of that. So I try to be as inspiring as I can, but doing it whilst being a leader of an organization
And
that
yeah,
demands excellence.
great. So what what this says to a person who wants to become a leader of an organization, in particular an NGO, is being uh, empathetic, being collaborative,
Mhm.
transformative, empowering. It takes all of these, a touch of all of these qualities to make a good leader. Tell us, what is the best piece of advice you've had, and what is the worst piece of advice you've had as you have been journeying through your career?
I think one of the best advice that, if I recall from my previous executive director, Ms. Janet Thompson, was um, it's like aligning our principles and getting to the yes. And I think it was aligned to a book by Roger Fisher and a couple of the other authors, but it's negotiating agreement without giving in. And I think it's there's an importance of principled negotiation and knowing who I am, who we are, and what we want to achieve. And those become non-negotiables in the negotiating table. And I think just being true to oneself in terms of that environment, but doing it so that you get a yes in terms of that. But in terms of worst advice, I think it is about, sticking to what you know and avoid taking risks. I
Mhm,
think it's well, sticking to what you know sort of alludes to one being, stay in your lane and, don't try and dabble in things that you don't know. And I think that also is stifling
mhm,
its wording. And I
mhm,
think it's trying to just keep you in a particular space and not allowing you to think outside of that box, let's say,
mhm.
and limits the growth and innovation that one would typically be able to explore and, expand on. And I think for me, I think the learning from that is that actually I am and encouraging innovation in all that we
Mhm,
do. And I
mhm,
think but risks, obviously, for NGOs are very important because it must be calculated risks. It's risks
mhm.
that we take because there's such a huge impact, on my staff, on my beneficiaries, as well as the organization itself. So it's with calculated risk, not no
Right.
risk. Mhm.
Included in that response is a lot of information for potential NGOs. First of all, the idea stick to the knitting doesn't work. It doesn't apply. You need to broaden your horizons. This is what you're saying. You've also said have your principles, know your values, and they're non-negotiable. And you're also talking about empowering others to do more. So, no, rather than being narrowed down to any one area. And I believe anybody listening to this will extract quite a bit of knowledge from the wisdom that you have shared with us. So then one would ask, as a mom, a mother of three, right?
Yep.
Yeah. As a teacher, as a student, a graduate student, and as a senior leader of an organization, how do you manage it all?
So how do I manage it all with great difficulty? I think, I think as women. I don't know. I was just having this conversation on the weekend about so how is it that women are expected to do so much and so many and fulfill different roles for so many different people. And I think perhaps emotions wise, we are attuned and aligned to what that is. So with great difficulty, and I think it is oftentimes just makes you just a little bit more reflective in terms of the way you approach things and what you do. And it's just to just go forth and be all you can be.
Mhm.
Because life is too short to be anything but.
Go forth and be all that you can be. Miss Omashani Naidoo, we thank you. We thank you very much. It's been a distinct pleasure speaking with you and hearing of your leadership style and hear of your values and the way you espouse your passion and your commitment to education, something that is very dear to our hearts, especially our female hearts. We thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne, for having me. And yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Listeners, we've been speaking with Ms. Omashani Naidoo, an NGO with a difference, making a difference in the lives of leaders of the future through education. Thank you for listening. Tune in again when we speak with another dynamic female NGO leader.